You can support me by turning on notifications, subscribing to my channel, and liking the video. Waiting for your comments. Ted Bundy, the serial killer who terrorized college campuses with a chilling double life. He was charming, intelligent, and often described as strikingly handsome, a man few would suspect of harboring monstrous impulses. Ted Bundy used his wit and smooth demeanor to blend seamlessly into college communities, all while orchestrating a horrific string of murders across multiple states. His victims were primarily young women, many of them students, who saw only the courteous stranger offering help with books or a broken arm. Little did they know they were walking into the hands of one of America's most notorious serial killers. Underneath the polished veneer lay a predator who terrorized the 1970s, leaving families broken, authorities perplexed, and entire campuses gripped by fear. This is the story of Ted Bundy, the consummate con man whose chilling double life proved that the face of evil can sometimes look disturbingly ordinary. The early, uneasy charms born Theodore Robert Cowell on November 24th, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. He was initially raised to believe his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his older sister. Eventually adopting the name Ted Bundy after his mother remarried, he moved around during childhood, ending up in Tacoma, Washington. From the outside, his youth appeared unremarkable, though retrospective accounts suggest an early capacity for manipulation and secrecy. In high school, Bundy was shy but academically sound, admired for his intelligence. Friends recall him having fleeting social circles, rarely forging deep bonds. Yet few would predict the darkness that would later consume him. Bundy enrolled at various times in multiple colleges, including the University of Puget Sound and the University of Washington. He studied Chinese initially, then pivoted to psychology, and even attended some law school classes. By all accounts, he seemed like a serious student. He sometimes volunteered in political campaigns, further refining his image of an ambitious, civic-minded young man. People saw him as bright, personable, and well-spoken, a promising figure with an eye for politics or law. This respectable facade masked deeper insecurities and a pathological need for control. By the time Bundy's crimes began, he'd already mastered the art of duplicity, able to appear as the perfect gentleman one moment and a lurking menace the next. Emergence of a predator. Bundy's first confirmed murders trace back to around 1974, when young women at college campuses in the Pacific Northwest started disappearing without a trace. Many were last seen in broad daylight, often approached by a man with a sling on his arm, asking for help carrying books or loading items into his Volkswagen Beetle. Because he exuded non-threatening charm, an earnest smile, a polite demeanor, victims let their guard down. They wanted to help, unaware that once they stepped into his vehicle, they'd effectively vanish from the public eye. The bodies were later discovered in remote wooded areas, often bearing signs of brutal violence. Investigators initially struggled to connect these disappearances, partly because of jurisdictional boundaries and partly due to Bundy's skill at leaving minimal evidence. One hallmark of Bundy's approach was his ability to manipulate college environments. He appeared as just another student or visitor, blending with campus crowds. When he introduced himself as Ted, it seemed so benign. He sometimes wore cast slings or braces to exploit people's empathy. If they perceived him as hurt, they were more inclined to help. Witnesses who glimpsed him in parking lots or libraries described him as calm and articulate, occasionally with a charming stutter meant to disarm suspicion. By the time investigators realized they were dealing with a serial offender, Bundy had already struck multiple times, honing his lures and adapting his methods to avoid detection. The sleuthing struggle as abductions piled up, the police grew alarmed. In Washington State and Oregon, The frequency of young women vanishing in near-identical circumstances was impossible to ignore. Details emerged. A man named Ted, sometimes driving a Beetle, presenting an injury. Panic spread across college campuses. Students traveled in pairs or groups, posted flyers about the missing. Self-defense classes saw a surge in enrollment. At the same time, Bundy cultivated relationships to maintain an alibi. He even had a long-term girlfriend, Elizabeth Klopfer, who described him as a gentle, loving partner, albeit with puzzling mood swings. She struggled to reconcile the attentive boyfriend at home with the rumored prowler, Ted, suspected by police. Tips flooded in. One friend of Bundy recognized the descriptions and reported him to authorities. But the name Ted was common, and Bundy's outward normalcy made it easy to dismiss. Even as he pursued legal or political aspirations, interning at a local Republican office or volunteering in crisis hotlines, he was paralleling a horror spree. This dual existence formed the core of his infamy, a student of human behavior practicing catastrophic deceit. It was like he was studying how to impersonate empathy, using it as a camouflage to zero in on victims who never saw it coming. Travels and evolution soon, Bundy moved beyond the Pacific Northwest. In late 1974, he enrolled in law school in Utah, and almost immediately, disappearances of young women began there. Different states started experiencing the same pattern. This cunning drift across state lines complicated policing, as each region had different detectives and no unified database for cross-referencing suspects. Bundy's confidence soared. He changed hairstyles, switched license plates, and occasionally used pseudonyms. He manipulated the justice system's blind spots while continuing to cultivate his respectable persona. At times, the tension between his daily life and his murderous urges escalated. He faced academic troubles in law school, dropping out eventually. His relationship with Liz grew strained, especially as she noticed odd possessions. A knife in his car, women's clothing he couldn't explain. Her suspicions deepened, driving her to secretly contact police. Yet the weight of her claims wasn't enough for a conclusive arrest, as circumstantial evidence alone failed to clinch guilt. Meanwhile, Bundy's escalations intensified, culminating in bolder and more reckless actions that would eventually betray him. The chaotic rampage January 1975 saw a particularly brutal period. Victims vanished from various colleges, BYU, the University of Utah. Each incident bore Bundy's familiar hallmarks. Then came the Colorado spree, during which Bundy abducted and killed at least one nurse and attacked several others. But he slipped up. In August 1975, a routine traffic stop by a Utah Highway Patrol officer uncovered suspicious items in Bundy's Volkswagen: handcuffs, a crowbar, and a ski mask. Although not definitive proof of murder, it cast intense scrutiny on him. Police dug deeper, linking him to multiple unsolved disappearances. The net tightened. Though Bundy was arrested on kidnapping charges, the prosecutorial system was slow. While under suspicion, he staged dramatic escapes, once from a library in the Pitkin County Courthouse, another from a jail in Glenwood Springs. After the second escape, he fled to Florida. Now a fugitive, Bundy's mania only heightened. In January 1978, he carried out a frenzied attack at the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, brutally assaulting multiple students. He murdered 2 and seriously injured others in a single night. This chaotic rampage, culminating in the kidnapping and murder of a 12-year-old girl, Kimberly Leach, sealed Bundy's reputation as a monster who targeted the very heart of collegiate life. The chilling double life exposed his final arrest came in February 1978, when a patrol officer spotted Bundy driving a stolen car. In custody once more, Bundy's carefully crafted facade unraveled. By now, The media recognized him as a prime suspect in a series of horrific crimes spanning multiple states. The trial that followed became a media sensation. Courtroom observers were astonished at Bundy's composure and articulate self-representation. He insisted on acting as his own attorney at times, mesmerizing onlookers with a twisted blend of intellect and arrogance. He was, after all, a former law student who believed he could outsmart the justice system. During the Florida trials, witnesses testified to the sheer brutality of his Chi Omega sorority house invasion. Surviving victims gave harrowing accounts. Bundy's penchant for showmanship sometimes overshadowed the grimness of the testimony. He relished cross-examining witnesses, orchestrating drama in the courtroom. But evidence, including bite mark analysis tying him to Chi Omega, was damning. The culmination led to death sentences for the Florida murders, which Bundy appealed for nearly a decade. Throughout these appeals, his notoriety expanded, drawing inquisitive journalists, psychologists, and even groupies who bizarrely idolized him. This phenomenon underscored the disturbing allure that Bundy's handsome visage and cunning mind exerted on some spectators. Psychological complexity Bundy's crimes remain a source of intense psychological study. He seemed to follow a pattern, targeting young women, often with long hair parted in the middle, reminiscent of an ex-girlfriend he had deeply resented. Yet beyond that, he displayed disorganized bursts of extreme violence and necrophilia. Despite claiming he led a normal life, Bundy confessed to over 30 murders, though estimates suggest a real number could be higher. His manipulation was legendary. To some, he was the caring boyfriend or the volunteer on a crisis hotline. To others, he was the boogeyman stalking dorm parking lots. Many experts cite Bundy as the quintessential psychopath, lacking empathy but brimming with the ability to mimic normal human emotion. Even on death row, he sought to shift blame, once attributing his violent urges to pornography addiction, an assertion widely challenged by criminologists as self-serving deflection. Final moments and legacy on January 24, 1989, after years of legal maneuvering, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair. Crowds gathered outside the prison, some celebrating the demise of a man who epitomized evil. He spent his final hours confessing to additional murders, offering investigators partial details in a desperate bid to stave off execution. The full truth of his victim count remains unknown. For families who lost daughters, sisters, or friends at his hands, the execution felt like a meager resolution to an unfathomable horror. But Bundy's memory lingers ominously in the public psyche. Documentaries, films, and books perpetuate his story, sometimes casting him as a dark anti-hero, a man so deceptive he continues to fascinate generations. He's become symbolic of the killer next door, an unassuming figure who merges into daily life, only revealing his homicidal cruelty under the cover of darkness. For law enforcement, studying Bundy's methods improved profiling techniques and spurred better cross-state communication, lessons that continue to shape how modern agencies track serial offenders. He also stands as a ghastly reminder that outward appearances or social niceties can conceal horrifying urges. No college campus would again be quite so naive, especially about lone men seeking help with a cast or a limp. Reflections on fear and intrigue decades after his execution, Ted Bundy's narrative still instills dread. Part of the terror lies in how normal he seemed, educated, volunteering for political campaigns, and holding an air of confidence. He shattered the comfort people found in believing a murder would look frightening or act suspiciously. Instead, he demonstrated that pure malevolence could cloak itself in politeness, intelligence, and even kindness. This dual life, friendly law student by day, relentless predator by night, captivates our collective imagination, urging us to question the cues we rely upon to judge trustworthiness. College campuses, typically seen as sanctuaries of learning and growth, became Bundy's hunting ground. The heartbreak endured by communities in Washington, Utah, Colorado, and Florida lingers as an unforgettable lesson. Universities beefed up security protocols, recommended traveling in groups, and taught women to be wary of nice strangers. Indeed, Bundy reshaped how society perceives personal safety, especially for young women. But interest in Bundy also demonstrates our cultural obsession with the psychology of killers. Many wonder, how did his traumatic childhood, combined with possible personality disorders, metastasize into such unspeakable violence? Could early interventions have changed his trajectory, or was he irredeemably wired for brutality? In Bundy's final interviews, he offered partial insights but remained evasive about the full scale of his deeds. His cunning extended to the grave, leaving behind only fragments of the truth. Conclusion: a haunting legacy Ted Bundy's story is, at its core, a chilling testimony to the depths of human duplicity. He walked among unsuspecting peers on college campuses, reading the same textbooks, chatting amiably with classmates, and all the while plotting monstrous acts. The veneer he wore, intelligent, charismatic, helpful, allowed him to slip past warnings and lull victims into a fatal comfort. His capture and trial ended the immediate threat, but the shockwave of his crimes reverberated for decades, inspiring new approaches to forensic investigation and victim advocacy. Yet no matter how many times Bundy's tale is recounted, it never fully loses its power to horrify. Something about his ability to manipulate and kill unsettles our primal need to feel safe in the presence of a charming stranger. He is the blueprint for many fictional villains, but the real tragedy is not a story. It's the dozens of lives cut short, the families left grieving, and the shadow he cast on any sense of innocence that might have existed in the 1970s. In the final analysis, Ted Bundy remains a name synonymous with the darkest corners of the human psyche. He is the predator who terrorized college campuses, the cunning chameleon who lived a chilling double life. His ultimate downfall reflects law enforcement's dogged pursuit and the mounting weight of evidence that no ruse could forever conceal. Above all, Bundy's saga reminds us that sometimes evil doesn't necessarily appear in monstrous form. It can walk among us, smiling, whispering polite greetings, asking for help with school books or a broken arm. And that is the most disquieting lesson of all.